Good afternoon, everyone. Amanda Carter, Program Manager from AMPC here today. Thank you very much for joining us on part 4 of our safety webinar program that has been being run over the last couple of weeks. Just quickly, for those that are new, I see that we've got a few new people that have registered for today's. If you're interested in viewing the previous webinars, just shoot me through an email, or if you go onto YouTube, you will be able to find them on YouTube, and we can also send you out the previous workbooks as well. I noticed there's been a few late registrations today. I will send you the workbooks during the presentation, but you won't need them directly for the presentation, but they're for your ready reference as you want to go back and use them as reference guides down the track. Just for those that haven't participated in one of our webinars before, we do really encourage questions. You will see on your toolbar you have a questions option. This is where you can type in questions, and then we will arrange for Jay to be able to answer them at the appropriate time. So just would like to thank Jay McGrath from Aegis Insurance for undertaking this fourth part of the webinar, which is understanding and assessing workplace hazards. Thanks very much, Jay.
Thanks, Amanda. Does that go?
Yes, let's go.
It sounds like go. Thanks, everyone. I understand that we've got a bunch of people sitting in the background. This is the first of these webinars that I've done myself, so I'm working through the process. We will see how we go. If you can bear with me if I struggle with some of the technology or otherwise. But as Amanda said, can you please use that question button to ask any questions? Amanda and I were just speaking a moment ago about understanding the way we deal with people and their issues as we go, is trying to understand what people are thinking, how people are working. And whilst our ability to get a lot of information and share a lot of things between us at this time via video and telephone and the like, and webinars, without actually having to travel. What we lose as part of that is that personal interaction, and certainly I've done a number of these types of presentations, and I tend to find that I get a lot of my ability to add to the session from the questions and the expressions and things that you get from people in the audience. So without that, it's going to be a bit different. So having said that, we will work through it and we will go from there. But as I say, if you've got a question there, Amanda will be monitoring those questions, and she will be everybody's mouthpiece and ask those questions as we go. So we wanted to go through things as we start. And the first time he tries to move the mouse and move the screen, it didn't work. So we're off to a great start. But one of the things that many people may have seen today or yesterday is a survey that AMPC had sent out. Part of the program that we're assisting AMPC with is identifying the issues and identifying some of those hazards within the meat industry that we can assist to deal with. So a SurveyMonkey questionnaire went out yesterday, just asking a couple of questions, and one was about those top 5 things that causes manual handling issues, that result in soft tissue injuries and the like, and the other was in relation to lacerations and the like. 2 separate things. The reason we are asking these questions is just so that we can compile some thoughts around what really is the industry's thoughts on these things that are those significant hazards and those significant issues that we face. We've got, interestingly, I think Simon and I were going through this information a little bit earlier today, and I think we've got about 5 responses already. And it's interesting that whilst we expect them to be specific, all sitting in, we're probably of those 5, we thought there would probably only be 8 different things. It's interesting, different people are putting up different ideas, and we've probably got about 15 or 16 separate issues at the moment. So really come back to us with those, answer that as we go, and we'll go from there. What are we trying to do as part of this session? I suppose our idea is that we're trying to get to the bottom of this hazard and risk and injury process. We've talked about a whole bunch of things in the past, but what I want to do is just start off with some basic rules that I like to think of when we're dealing with these issues. I don't want you to overthink things. When we're looking at issues like this, don't overthink it. And equally, we can't wait to be perfect either. If we wait until we're perfect, we're never actually going to get anything done. We are going to freeze, and we're not going to get to where we want to be, because we're going to wait. We're not going to act. We need to be, aware, given that we're never going to be perfect, that there's always an opportunity there to improve, and we want to do that. Just because we're comfortable with where we currently sit doesn't mean that we can't get better and we can't move forward. We all have great ideas. We all know that our ideas are good, or we wouldn't be doing them. But other people have got other ideas, and being open to them can sometimes be of use. And it can come from people outside of the industry as well. I know that, in a lot of things that I've done with different types of industries and different employers over the years, you can see a lot of sharings between, and it's surprising. I see a lot of similarities I do a lot of work in the meat industry. I do a lot of work in health as well, and I do a lot of work in logistics. And I know that each of those things can share information between them. The way that you move things in a hospital environment is not dissimilar to the way things are moved often in a meat processing environment. We need to focus on the outcome. One of the things that I'll talk a bit about is that I get real frustration in people setting up a whole bunch of policies and a whole bunch of processes and not thinking about what the outcome is and not focusing on that. And what happens then is that we get so tied down in actually feeding the beast of the machine and feeding our reporting system and feeding all of that. If this happens, we have to fill out that form, we have to do this, that we get so overwhelmed by the filling out of the forms and the dealing with the process that we don't actually get to the end of the process. I also note that at this point, the 5 people that went through this presentation yesterday, as I went through it, did not pick up that there are 2 number 4s on this slide. It's taken until now for us to do that. So for that, I apologize. Listen and observe. Didn't observe the number of 4s, but we need to be able to hear what people are saying and watch what others are doing. Don't just think it's going to happen because it always has. And control what you can. Don't go looking for the things that are out of your control. Focus on the things that you can control, because that way we're going to improve. So they are some thoughts that are there for the sake of what I like to do. One of the things that we've identified as part of our process is that there's a model where we're dealing with these 4 pillars, and we believe that those 4 pillars are around consultation and awareness and leadership and control, and all of those need to work together. Some of them link others, but without all of them, we're not actually going to get to the perfect world that we want to be in. Let's talk about, we're never going to be 100% perfect, as we said before. But one of the things that we need to remember, that again, every activity that we do, every new thing that we introduced as part of that process will create a new risk, create a new hazard. Every new task that we do will create the opportunity for something to happen. So unless we're not going to do anything ever, we're going to continue to bring work into place. Said before, don't overthink it or you're going to freeze. But what we want to do is break things down into components. And I talked about not focusing on that compliance machine, because ultimately what we want to do is get the job done. We are in business to do a job. We're in business to actually create a task. We're in business to produce meat products. We're in business to transport a product from one place to another. We're in business to collect taxes and pay benefits to people and the like. It's about getting the job done. Let's get that job done. Too many people focus on the process and limit themselves to getting it done. And we need to celebrate those results when they happen. We know that we do things well. We know that things occur that are what we want to do. Let's celebrate them when they occur. When we get back to issues, we know that there are some things that you need to know. The law talks about all of these things that we have, but we need to be in a position where we need to know what goes on in our business. It's that simple. The law says that we need to discuss information and share and consult in that way. That's what we need to do. We need to review things. We need to review our business. We can't just start our business up, start up a machine, pump a whole bunch of people into that workplace and expect them to go on without any trouble. We need to review what people are doing over time, and we need to understand those risks. And when we get to those hazards, the risk of those hazards creating injury, we need to control them. It's that simple. That's what we need to do to control it, and we need to monitor things as we go. That's our process. That's our loop. We need to understand what goes on in our business. We need to share the information with people. We need to review it, control it, and monitor it as we go forward. From a consultation point of view, we know that we need to consult with those people involved. One of the things that I mentioned earlier that Amanda and I were discussing was, we need to talk to people about stuff. We can gather so much information from talking to people. The problem that we have sometimes is that our conversations can be one way, and that can create a problem for us. Like, I know that I'm not as comfortable in this conversation that we're having because it's one way. I'm not getting any feedback from anybody else, and so I'm not sure whether there's actually anybody even there. I could be just sitting here talking to my window and nobody there. So that consultation component is really significant, and we need to just keep doing it. And the law says we have to. It doesn't matter what jurisdiction we're in. It doesn't matter whether we're in New South Wales, Queensland, South Australia, Victoria, New Zealand. It makes no difference. The law says that we're meant to consult with our people. We're meant to share information, but it just makes sense anyway, doesn't it? We know that we are going to get more information from people that are doing the work than we are about just trying to watch ourselves, because we don't necessarily understand it as well as everybody else might. And there are a whole bunch of ways that we can consult in those things. There are the formal things, and people talk about, we've got an OHS committee, that's it. That's not our consultation process. It's not our most effective consultation process. It's so much broader than that. If we just talk about safety at the OHS committee, it can create problems for us. Our consultation is about our breaks, and it's about what happens in the break room, in the lunchroom, in the while we're getting changed, while we're putting boots on, while we're walking through the car park. All of those things are the opportunities that we have to consult with people and to deliver this information as we go. There are, of course, the more formal consultation processes that occur from time to time, and those are really important from a documentation point of view, but we've got a whole bunch of opportunities to have these conversations, and it might just be as we walk through the plan. So I want you to think about, as you go, about who you consult with and how you consult. And if we only choose half a dozen people that are on our safety committee, it's not necessarily delivering what we want to do. We want information from people, and we want information to them, and we want them to be able to share, and we want them to be able to provide information to us. And we know that everyone's got an opinion. Whether or not we want to hear it, everyone's got an opinion. Sometimes it's valuable, sometimes it's frustrating, but you've got to deal with the frustrating to get the valuable. It's like, sorting out the diamonds from the rocks or wherever the diamonds come from. You know, we've got to work through that stuff to get to it. So we talk to our people. We want to share. We want to hear what people are doing, and we can find some common ground. We know that nobody goes to work wanting to get hurt, and everybody pretty much wants to do the right thing. There may be the very, very rare outlier, but pretty much people want to do the right thing when they come to work. All of us want to do that. We've got to provide feedback to people. If people are coming to us with information and they're giving us reports, they're giving us feedback on, there's a great big hole in the floor over there, it might be whatever those things are, it's got to go both ways, and we've got to be able to feed back to people. If we don't give them that information, then, you know, people are going to start to feel ignored. And I know if I'm talking to people and they ignore me, then I'm just not going to bother going back to them anymore. I'm not going to continue to engage with people if I'm getting no feedback. It will just stop coming to you. You won't get that information. There's a value in every single piece of information that you get. It might be some information is of a greater value to the business than others, but there's some value in all of it. And even if it's just, it doesn't need to be that this guy's great idea to fix that problem with a machine isn't necessarily all that it's ever going to be. Some of that information is just going to be like a culture or a temperature check in your business. People coming to you and talking to you is going to give you a sense of understanding of where the business is at. As I said before, we need to report back. It doesn't matter how simply that reporting back is. If people are giving us incident reports and they never hear anything back about it, then they're going to stop. They're going to stop doing it. If I come to you and I report this thing to you, if I don't see an outcome to that, a change, a response, and anything, then they're going to stop doing it because they don't see the point to it.
Jay, we've got a question that's come through. It's a great question from Royston. Any unique ideas on ways to document consultation other than WHS committee meetings?
Yeah, you can do it. You can. There are a number of ways. There are just, you know, maybe it becomes a case of in those informal discussions when you're dealing with people, maybe you document that sort of thing from time to time. You might shoot out a text message to people. You might do you know, some SMS dumps. We work, you know, I know some clients outside of the meat industry who will just constantly, when something comes up, they just collect a whole bunch of information, and every now and again they'll just shoot a text flyer or an email flyer or a social media flyer out to people, feeding that sort of information back. We can do that. Some organizations, my organization at the moment has a Facebook group where because 80% of the business is working remotely at the moment, that sort of information gets shared that way. What we have today, often to our detriment as a society, is the greatest ability to communicate with people that we've ever had in the existence of man. There are a whole bunch of opportunities to use it, and you can do it. You can document every single point that has been, the discussion that happens everywhere and anywhere and everywhere. But yeah, utilize those things and feed it back that way, and start to get people to talk to you outside of that committee. Still, obviously, document your committee stuff, but there are some ways outside of that. I hope that answers the question. If it doesn't, I'm happy to take that up later.
Another good idea that I stole once from another company was doing table talks and putting TV screens up in the lunchrooms as another way of being able to consult and communicate. Now, I wasn't as clever as the company that I saw, but they had animated cartoons and they had really good engagement from that as well. And also just action minutes as well, where you just have an action plan.
Yeah, we've been doing a little bit of stuff with these guys that have developed a training process as well, which sends questions to people within your business, and they've got to do a training a very tiny, like it's all like 15, 20, 30 seconds worth of training stuff where they just ask the question. And it's automated and it gets allocated and we know who's done it and all that sort of stuff. And it's not so much about training, but it's a little bit about awareness, it's a little bit about consultation, but it's about engaging people in the thought process that works really well. From an awareness perspective, what's it about? We know that we can't know what's going on if we're not aware of what's going on. Part of that's coming from our consultation process, but part of it's about different ways of gathering information as well. And we know that the important thing that we have is a whole bunch of information in our business that we gather. We know that our business gathers all sorts of information about financials and production time and how fast the chain's running and all of that stuff. We record all of that, we report all of that, we understand all of that, we monitor all of that. And this information is just exactly the same. And it should be just as valuable to us because we know that there are a whole bunch of reasons why there are little gems in some of that OHS information that we get. One is whether we're hurting people or not, but a lot of it is about a bit about a culture survey in the organisation as well. We know that, and all of this stuff is filled in more broadly in the workbook that I think Amanda has sent to everybody. But we talk about inspections and observations, and those inspections and observations can be things like reporting of incidents. So as we go through and we get incident reports and the like, or it might be housekeeping inspections that we do from time to time. People refer to it as the safety inspection. I love them because they document stuff. They're a negative because if you do them every 6 weeks, for example, or every 2 months, then that's the only time people think about it, because it's those other additional observations that people have as they walk through that we want people to start to report. The reporting of incidents is really important as well. The reporting of injuries equally is just as important. As part of those inspection processes we talked about and those housekeeping checklists, and the wandering through the place and the watching for things. And what I want people to do as they're observing and they're wandering and they're looking at things throughout the place is I want you to look, as you do it, I want you to look for the hazard. There's a difference, and we talk about this a little bit more in a minute. There's a difference between a hazard and a risk. And the hazard is the thing that can cause the harm, and the risk is the risk of it happening. What we do is we put controls in place to minimize the risk of that hazard causing us harm. If we go back and imagine a set of traffic lights or a road. We've got a road and there's cars on it traveling down the street. The hazard is the roadway, and if I need to cross it, the roadway is a significant hazard to us. And the hazards are around being hit by cars and doing all those sorts of things. If I put traffic lights in there, then that's a control. That control is really important to us, and it will make it safe. It will reduce the risk of the hazard causing us harm. But the hazard, the road, is still there. What we want to do is control those things, because if that control ceases to exist, so in the case of the traffic lights, if the power of the traffic lights goes out, the hazard goes back to where it was before. So we want to understand what the hazards are. We can identify the risks of it down the track. We can identify what controls might be in place. But we need to understand what the hazard is. And once we've got that, we're in a good place. We always need to look for the hazard, not the control. That's what I want to get to, because that's what's really important, because that's the basis of everything that we have. We know that incident reporting, and there's, I have a whole bunch of people over the years have talked about incident reporting and why do we do it, and from an incident reporting point of view, I really want to know what happened. I don't want to know anything about the whys yet. I want to know what happened. I want to know when it happened. I want to know where it happened. I want to know who it happened to. I want to know who saw it. I want the facts. All I want are the facts about what happened at that moment. Because until I've got those facts, then I cannot move on any further. I need to make sure that I understand what happened and when, and all of those things around the exact circumstances that occurred. A very wise, old school senior policeman said to me one day that his greatest fear when investigating circumstances was that his greatest fear was someone's memory improving over time. So I know this now, but tomorrow I remember, oh yeah, no, something else happened. And that improving memory might actually be an improvement in the memory, but it might also be the result of, if I start to dwell on it and I start to think about things, I fill in the gaps. And whether those gaps are as a consequence of things that have truly happened, or things that I imagine happened, or something I've extrapolated from something else that someone else has said, be fearful of the improving memory, and as a consequence, make sure that we go back and get all of that information at the very beginning, and we can gather that information. Forget about the why. Do not worry at all about why something happened until you know exactly what it was that happened. Why doesn't matter. Why does not affect what happened. We need to get back to the case of what happened. Then we get on to whys. And one of the things that I like to use is this principle of the 5 whys. There are a bunch of ways that we can deal with things. And I know that, for example, if my car doesn't start, the what is that my car doesn't start. The why, well, the first why becomes, the battery's dead. And then the second why becomes, well, if the battery's dead, why? The alternator's not working. The third why is, well, why is it not working? Well, the fan belt's broken. I think they still have fan belts in cars. The fan belt's broken. And the fourth why becomes, well, if the fan belt's broken, why is that? And it was because it was older than it was meant to be. And then when we get to the fifth why, we should probably be around about, or just about at the root cause of the problem. If the fan belt got past its effective life cycle, because we didn't have a maintenance program in place to make sure that these things got changed regularly. So all we needed to know at the very start was the thing didn't work, the car didn't work. We go from there. Other circumstances. We've seen circumstances in the past where somebody might get caught by a cutting unit or a head cutter or something along those lines. Well, that's the what. We know what happened. That's exactly what happened. We know what happened, when it happened. We know people saw it happen. We know who it happened to. All of these sorts of things. We start to work through those why processes, and we know that he's holding the unit by the blades. Well, that's our first why. Second one, why was he? It's because the handle was a bit loose, he thought. Why? Well, he's inexperienced, and he was asking someone else to show him what to do. Again, why did he do that? Well, maybe the training wasn't right, and he wasn't all that sure about that process. And then the fifth why was, well, that training process wasn't adequate. It wasn't right. So we can, as part of that investigation of that process, we get to the guts of where our controls fell over. The hazard is the unit. The hazard is the cutting unit. The controls were in place, and one of those controls was training, and that fell over. From a leadership perspective, we know that there are often problems in our process. We know that, we talked about our 4 pillars and those processes where we go through, and the consultation part being the beginning. Our second pillar was this awareness bit and understanding things and being able to know, and that a large part of that awareness process is being fed by consultation. It's also being fed by information. what we're going to talk next is about that control point. But if we don't get this leadership thing right in the middle, then those two things won't matter. The leadership within the place is significant, and it needs to go right through the business. We need to know that this process of leadership is strong within the organisation. We need to know that, you know, we can provide a level of direction in the process. We need to show people where we're going. We need to take it there, and it needs to be, as I said, from the top to the bottom. And we need to, you know, take people on the journey that we want them to go in. This leadership needs to show this real link between the beliefs that we have. We talked before about a whole bunch of policies. I kind of said, look, let's ignore our policies for the moment. We know they're there and they're important, but let's not think about it, because our policies are just our beliefs. They're just a documentation of our beliefs. You know, we believe in all of these things, so we write them down in a policy and we expect to follow them. But do we follow them is the question. Our leadership comes to the expectation that we have a series of beliefs and our behaviours should follow that. And it's really important that they do. We know that we love to think that they do, but do they? One of the reasons why this leadership thing is so important, and we know that pretty much every state across the country is getting to the point where they're introducing industrial manslaughter legislation. We know that ACT, Northern Territory, Queensland have all got industrial manslaughter legislation in place at the moment. A couple of weeks ago, two directors of a car wreckers in Queensland have both been sentenced to 10 months in jail. Admittedly, that 10 months was suspended, but both 10 months jail. That's a significant issue. We know that legislation in Victoria comes into effect on the 1st of July. So what are we, 13 days away from that? And that will be significant as well. We're not going to spend time going through all of the penalties and all of the fines and jail terms that can be put in place to try and build and enforce this leadership. But we know that in Victoria, you know, as a result of, you know, reckless disregard of safety requirements, it's a $16.5 million fine in Victoria for industrial manslaughter. So the business is looking at a fine of $16.5 million. The one in Queensland, that I was talking about, as well as the 2 by 10 months jail, the business was fined $3 million. $3 million to any business is a significant amount of money. But the maximum penalty for some of the officers within that organisation in Victoria now for industrial manslaughter is 20 years jail. I'm not sure anyone can suggest that they've got 20 years to spend in jail. One of the things that we ask clients now, and we're asking people throughout the meat industry and throughout all of our other businesses that we are working in, when you think about that, think about your business and just think about who's going to jail. Because in the event that something goes 100% wrong, to the worst way that it can, somebody's going to jail. Even where there is not industrial manslaughter legislation, like New South Wales at the moment is not considering it. South Australia tossed it around for a little bit and then let that lapse. But we know that even though industrial manslaughter does not come into place in Victoria for 13 days, we've got a client who we were not dealing with their safety stuff. We just know of them. 70-year-old woman working in a scrap metal yard, disregarded. She had a forklift operator operating a forklift, had been working for her for 10 years. She was operating another forklift. She'd been doing this for 30 or 40 odd years. She's 70 years old, cancer-riddled lady running this business. She was driving the forklift. She'd never had a license. She put somebody into the forklift, ended up, as a result of an accident, the man dying when he fell from the forklift. 10 years in jail. So industrial manslaughter legislation did not exist, but that reckless disregard to the sanctity of life, or however the legislation might describe it, is going to put people in jail. And we know that regardless of the level of or how the industrial manslaughter requirements are in place. We know that in a lot of cases, supervisors are put into are made responsible for the way things go on in the workplace. And then there's leading hands, and they're whatever we call them. They're leading hands, they're foremen, no matter what we might call them. We know that these people are involved in the activities. We know that it's the behaviours of these people, it's the behaviours that they allow, and it's the behaviours that they display that are significant causes of injury within the workplace. We know that one of the greatest hazards that we have in place, and we talk about this in the workbook, the greatest hazards we have in place are people. If we didn't have people in there, nobody's ever going to get hurt. So we know that they're potentially a problem. We know that people cut corners to save time. I'm going to be told that this never happens, but we know that that it does. We've all seen, I've seen circumstances, we're going to say that it doesn't happen in our own workplaces, and hopefully it doesn't, and it's becoming less and less of an issue. You've got the supervisor walking down the line that sees something, sees a trim that just needs to be done, or a process that he just wants to display. How often does that supervisor pull out a knife and do that job in those 5, 6, 7 seconds that it's going to need to be done without putting on the PPE, without putting on a glove? We know that that happens. We can't let it happen. I've seen it happen a lot. I think it's happening less, but we need it to happen not at all. We understand why it happens because of that process of and the need for some speed. We come to that last pillar. We come to that last pillar of control, and we come to that pillar of what are we going to do in relation to these hazards. You know, we need to fix the easy one. We don't. If I could never write anything down for the rest of my life, I'd be a happy man. But we know that the world doesn't work like that anymore. We need to document things. We need to be able to show what we've done. But there are events where we don't need to necessarily go through a great long risk assessment process. We don't need to document bits and pieces here and there and go through a lengthy process. If it's easy, fix it. If it's easy, fix it. Talk to some people about it. You might shoot an email to people. You might discuss it in your safety committee. You know, do those sorts of things. But if you can fix it simply, just fix it. Other things are not so simple, so we need to go and prioritise that risk. I would hope that what we like to do is, you know, when we've got a whole bunch of things that are requiring our time, that we prioritise those things and we minimise that level of risk of those and deal with the biggest problems first. And we can deal with those biggest problems first by dealing with going through an assessment process, going through a process to identify that level of risk and go through it. You know, I want to sort of think about whether we understand within our businesses what that level of risk is. One of the reasons for the SurveyMonkey survey that I talked about earlier was that we want to understand what people see as their risks within the organisation, and to understand those things and document the inherent risk, and then document the resultant risk after we've got some controls in place. Let's identify what those things are, fix them, identify where our risk is at the moment, and that gives us a level of understanding as to what I need to do tomorrow to make it better. And we can do that in a risk register. A lot of organisations will have a risk register. It's something that needs to be established. It's a document that can come back to your Bible of control to a degree, something that shows you all the things that can be done. If the worst is to occur, you want to be able to show the regulator and show yourself to a degree for your own state of mind that you did all that you could do. You want to know that because none of us want to have anybody hurt, but we want to be able to show the regulator as well. So we find that important. We want to allocate controls as part of this process. We want to get those controls in place, document them as we go. reassess those controls as we work. So we can put a control in place, but we can't just put in that control and leave it there and let it sit. We know most of the people in this webinar are aware of the hierarchy of controls and those sorts of things, and we've got some examples of that in our workbook. But one of the things that I found some years ago was this separate type of explanation of it, and I find this really useful, where we look at the separation of the two things that I talked about before. We've got the task, and that's the digging out of the hole. The hazard's the overhang above us, and the risk is that overhang falls. And there are some very simplistic ways of describing what we do. Our best way is to remove that hazard altogether by elimination. In this instance, it's blow it up and get rid of it. And we know that that's the most effective way, down to the least effective way of putting on a helmet. That's not going to necessarily help us. I think that there are, in a lot of circumstances, the use of helmets and high visibility clothing is often can create an additional hazard of its own. It can provide a level of undeserved safety, or a level of comfort that is not really deserved. And in the case of a helmet, if there are not things above you and you're not going to bump your head, don't wear a helmet. It just adds an additional weight to your neck that creates another separate hazard. So understand these things before we introduce them. All the way through the process, we need to continue to consult. We need to continue to work through these processes and talk to people. Every time we make a change to something, we need to review that change for its impact. We need to understand what this change is going to do as we work through that, and how it impacts on the flow of work through our process. Does it change something down the line? If we do something differently at the beginning, does it change something significantly at the end? Once we do that, we need to train people. We don't just do it. We don't just change something and say, look, this has been done. I think I'll give an example of that in a minute, because that can create further problems. And then we need to review it. We need to review that change to make sure that we haven't screwed the whole thing up in our attempt at trying to fix it. Some years ago, this is the only photo I could find of this type of thing. And if you can imagine, I was working in a logistics organization, and what happened was that in this facility, they dehumidified clothing that ended up going to Target and Kmart and the like. And so the clothing would be dehumidified. It would be then put in a bundle on this little blue tray here. A plastic bag would be put over it. This lid would come across to the other side, and vacuum seal the packaging, so that when it then got out to the store, the Kmart or the Target or the whatever, the staff there could open it up, hang it. Because it had been dehumidified, it didn't wrinkle. So it didn't need to be ironed. They could just hang it, and it was perfect. One of the problems that we'd noticed as I assessed this task was that what was happening was people were pulling the plastic bag over, and through habit and familiarity, what they would do is they would hold it, and they would hold it in a place around about where that orange power plug is, that the lid would then come across and vacuum seal the item that was there. As it came across, they would quickly pull their hands out so they didn't get caught by the lid. It was not a massive weight, but it would have given someone potentially a bit of a bruise and could be a problem. This is where I admit to making a mistake. I spoke to the maintenance guy when we were discussing this. There was myself, the manager of the site, and I spoke to the maintenance guy. And I said to him, why don't we change this? There was a button, sorry, that, from argument's sake, like that green button at the bottom there. they had one hand holding onto it and the other pushing the button so that it came across. I said, why don't we treat this like a metal press and we have two buttons there, so both hands have to be out. And if we have both hands out, then they can't do that. And I spoke to him about whether or not he could do that. What I didn't say to him, and where I failed, was I didn't say to him, don't do it until we've talked about it again. Because on the following Monday, the manager rang me and said, after they were finished with their hysterical laughter, he said, you won't believe what they've done. John, the maintenance man, has changed it. He's gone and done it, and he's not spoken to anybody about it. But what they were now doing was, habit said that they like to hold this bag down as they did it. So they were now doing what they'd done. Nobody had trained them. They just said, oh, you got to push both buttons now. But what they were doing is they were pushing both buttons on this machine. And miraculously, they'd found a way to hold this bag on. But what they were doing now was pressing the buttons with both hands and sticking their head onto that blue mat and holding the bag down that way. By failing to communicate, by failing to discuss, by failing to review, we had allowed an additional hazard to come into play. That's what I mean. I hope that makes sense. Discuss it, do it, work with people before we get too far down the path. When we look at these tasks, I want to look at breaking it down, because it's the tasks that are important in our hazard. We need to break it down. So we take it, let's just look at an example. We've all either done or seen someone hang a door. And that's the process, that's the job that needs to get done. But when we break it down, we know that, what we do, there are, I don't know how many there are, there are probably 8 or 9 different tasks there in that job. But we lift the door into position, we mark out where the hinge goes, we cut out the hinge. So we've got a manual handling process in there, we've got a laceration process in there. We install the hinges into the door with screws, so we've got some other bit. We lift it back up again, so we've got another manual handling issue. We install hinges into the door frame. We test the movement. Then we mark out the door handle, and we drill the door with the hole out for the door handle. So potentially we've got some foreign body scenarios in our eyes. We know. So break it down into specific tasks. Break it down into individual tasks, and it's then that we can start to understand how we control each of those hazards. For example, we might solve 2, 3, and 4, hazard 2, 3, and 4 by buying a door that's got hinges already installed. For example, we might solve tasks 1 and 5 as part of this by having 2 people involved in the list. But without breaking it down in the way that we've talked here, the job is too big. We're not able to control all of those things as we go. Similarly, we talked about putting those controls in place. Our dead battery before. We go through the whys, we identify the whys to get to it. We can use this. We can use this investigation of what happened, what these issues are. And I accept that this is not a hazard, but it's a process and it's a task and it's a situation. We know that ultimately our plan is to not have the battery dead. That's what we want. So if we know that the alternator wasn't functioning by having a light there, then that might avoid it happening in the first place. We know that the alternator belt was broken. That control above would give us that as well. We know that the belt was beyond its useful date. So maybe we had a proactive monitoring maintenance program in place, it wouldn't have got to that point. So each of those things can be controlled. They're different controls for each of these tasks, but we can do it as we go. Similarly, we have a flow scenario where, ultimately, this is a customer service situation. Customer comes in at each point, and we go down this table. We know that a customer might come in to ask about a service issue. We know that at the very bottom of this, worst case, somebody gets punched on the nose because they haven't been able to deal with it. Whole bunch of processes through here that if we deal with any of these things down the path, we're going to be able to deal with these things as they go. Put a control in place for each of these. This is outlined in the workbook as well. And talked importantly about monitoring controls. We need to get these controls in place such that we get them in, we monitor them, and we update them. Things change over time. We bring in new information, we bring in different processes. In a meat environment, we might be looking at a line on a kill floor, and we'll have situations that occur at one end of the line that may well change what we need to do down the other end. So when we make a change at the start, we need to monitor what happens down the other end, just to make sure that we don't create a situation that gets out of hand somewhere further down the line. We need to train people in relation to these things. We need to get down the road of continually training people, making sure that they're competent, making sure that they are able to do the job before we just throw them in. And we need to supervise them over time. And that's really important. Our supervisors need to be there, not just pushing production and not just driving an outcome. They need to be monitoring what people are doing at the same time. That's not to be a policeman, it's to be a supervisor. And we need to monitor what people are doing. We know that's really important. We know that our training needs to be right. We need to document our training. We need to get some training in place. We know, I know of 2 current prosecutions that are occurring, and both of them probably come from a lack of training, either a lack of training or a lack of documentation of what training was provided. And both of those organisations, not within the meat industry, are trying to deal with those issues at the moment, and are going to have to deal with, even if they're not fined, even if they're not penalised in any way, the discomfort and the lack of productivity that comes from being required to attend a court hearing or just the investigation is significant as we go. We need to monitor people as they go. We need to monitor people's level of competency, and we need to make sure that before we withdraw that supervision and that monitoring of them, or by the time before we reduce it, we need to make sure that they are competent. You think about the child crossing the road. Day one, you don't let the 3-year-old just cross the road. You get to our famous traffic lights from earlier. We walk to the traffic lights, we hold the child's hand, and we walk them across the road. At some point in the future, and it might be 2, 3, 4 years down the track, they might just happily go out the front door, and we don't even think about where they're going on the road, and they walk and they cross the road on their own. But we don't instantly withdraw that monitoring from day 1 to day 5. There's a journey for us. We monitor, we pull back. We might let them decide when they go whilst we monitor them, and we get an understanding of whether or not we consider them to be competent. It's exactly the same with our staff that we are training, that we are supervising, that we are putting into a role. And that's even more of an issue when it's a potentially hazardous job that they're doing, like using knives, like using machines, like driving forklifts, like lumping meat out of a cool room into a truck. All of those things are potentially significant. And even if someone comes to us and says that I'm the best stockman that's ever existed, you want to watch them and you want to know for yourself that they're good before you actually let them off the leash. That's the extent of that part of our presentation. We know, I hope that that's made some sense. I don't know whether anybody's still awake. Hopefully everybody is. One of the things that AMPC has introduced with our support is that we're now providing an advisory line that's open to all members of AMPC. The number is on the screen. Amanda, I believe, has sent that out to everyone, but that's available to you for most of the day. It deals with any of those workers' comp issues, any of those OHS or workplace safety issues, anything that as a first line of advice as to what you might want to do. and equally from a HR or an IR perspective. We know that the advisory line deals with issues around understanding what we need to do in relation to a claims process, what we need to do with claim forms, what we do with return to work process, those types of things. From a safety perspective, what might have to happen to how we want to respond after an incident, what we do in relation to that investigation and the like. And there are a whole bunch of issues and supports that we can provide to people in relation to that HR and that industrial relations part of your business. So it's there and available for you if and when you use it. I hope you do. It's new. It's been introduced in the last couple of weeks. We want to be inundated by questions. We've had one which caused a great deal of joy to Sam, who's our quarterback or our triage person that manages that line. We want him to be really busy and go from there. That's about all I had to say. Amanda, have we got any questions?
Thanks very much, Jay. No, you've obviously answered everyone's questions through your presentation. So we haven't had any more questions come in, but if anyone does have any questions or wants to discuss anything further with Jay, let me know. I can get you in touch with him if you don't have his contact details, and he'll be more than happy to assist you. So thank you, Jay. That wraps up part 4 of our safety presentation.
One of the things that people might do is potentially, you can get to me through that advisory line as well. Amanda will send my details to everyone. Happy to have a chat, happy to work through anything that we've talked about, but most definitely use the advisory line. Even if you just want to share something that you've done that you think others might do. A really important part of this line, this advisory line, is that we're able to share stuff across the industry. So please do that.
Excellent. And just a friendly reminder for the survey, it will literally take you less than 2 minutes to complete, but it will give us really valuable feedback on where we can direct some of our research as we continue this safety project. So that concludes today's webinar. At the end of it, there will be a survey. If you can just complete the survey, that will give us some more feedback and help us program future webinars as well. Hopefully, as the borders start to open, we'll be able to move back to some face-to-face network meetings. But we are also looking to continue to do some of these webinars. You will continue to get emails out from AMPC. We still have a number of webinars around energy, some market access ones and things like that that are coming up, some ones around packaging in the department. So stay tuned for those. This presentation will be available via a YouTube link, so feel free to share it around. I know a number of companies have actually been sharing them around with their managers and supervisors because we understand that everyone can't get here, and I think that's a really extra add-on benefit that we never realised. So thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you on future webinars.
Thanks, everyone.